there's a lot of work that I think AI can help or LLMs can help. And I say this with the nicest of intentions, but the drudgery of building a website.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Proof of Work podcast brought to you by NoRamp. Today, I'm here with another amazing guest. Today, I'm here with Allan Leinwand, the CTO of Webflow. Allan, how are you doing today?
Fine, Ben. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you on the show. Doing great. Yeah, you've had such an amazing career. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, so my name's Allan Leinwand, as you said. I am CTO here at Webflow. I've been involved in this networking, cloud, infrastructure, internet apps thing for quite some time. And just really, it's an honor to be here. And I just really like working in all things internet.
Amazing. Yeah, you've worked for, some of the biggest companies in the world: ServiceNow, Slack, of course, Webflow, Shopify, and we have many questions about many of these companies because you've had some great experiences and some of your own ventures as well. So,
Yes.
yeah, I'd love to jump right into it and ask, Digital Island. This was your own company. You scaled it from, yourself and a few friends to over 1,800 employees in the extremely early days. I wonder, can you actually plan for Rocketship scale and both on the technical side, people, etc.? Is it something you plan for or can plan for, or is it just something you adjust and figure out along the way?
That's a great question. So Digital Island was my first startup that I actually was lucky enough to get involved in through a friend of a friend. And you're right, it's just a couple of us that got started. I had only been involved in bigger companies. I came out of college and I went to HP and spent a couple of years there. And then I went over to Cisco when Cisco was still very small and was there for about 6.5 years. But I met a friend of a friend and he said, I've got this idea for this startup. And I honestly didn't even know what a startup was like or what it was about. We went and got it venture funded. And we started building this company, as you say, called Digital Island, which back in the late mid to late 90s was around building data centers, infrastructure for hosting internet applications, and eventually pushing them out to the edge, what we'd now call a CDN. So the short answer to your question, Ben, is I don't think I knew how to scale because I had never done it. I saw things that had scaled, like when I was at Cisco. Obviously, I saw that go from very small to very large over the time frame I was there. And I think I just sort of stumbled into figuring out how to scale things properly. So I didn't plan for it. My co-founder, he had scaled a company in the past, so he knew what it was like to scale. And he sort of like pulled me along and said, you got funded, now we have to go do X, Y, and Z. And I remember lots of early discussions trying to understand how to build a culture of a company that we knew was going to go 10x, 100x, 200x of what we had originally started with.
It's amazing. You hear these founders and early employees at these big companies. They say, oh, yeah, we had to adjust. We had to get more servers. We had to hire and scale out the team. And you wonder in the early days of these rocket ship growth companies how it's like internally. So having someone along the ride who had done this before was probably extremely helpful.
Yeah, I remember one of the early days of Digital Island, like literally, you know, drilling holes in data center floors and cabling things up. And to your point, I remember like at the time, we were trying to hire employees and we didn't have like a purchasing department or a way to get laptops or anything. So we'd hire someone and I'd get an email and I'd go to CDW and I'd just order them a laptop and ship it to their house. And I remember we opened up our San Francisco office for the first time and we signed the lease and it was, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 square feet, something like this. I remember we just hired our very first office manager, somebody I'd known from Cisco. And I have this very vivid memory of walking into the office space, which was like just a big open square, and looking at Amy and Amy looking at me. And I was like, I guess we have to go buy some pads of paper because we had no idea where to start. We went downstairs and like went to Staples and like got pens and pads of paper and just started working. It was kind of bizarre, but you learn how to scale sort of in times of necessity and you learn how to build things up and you learn hopefully on patterns that you've seen before on what you need to do in order to scale up and just grow a company.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's also like early stage companies if they raise too much money too fast, sometimes they don't have that pressure
Yeah.
to figure out the scale. It's like, oh, we can sit on our butts and just mess around a little bit. So no, that's cool. That's awesome.
I don't think I've ever felt the need to sit on my butt. I've always like been driven by trying to succeed, by driven to try and, I guess you'd say grow enterprise value these days. But to me, it was like I felt the weight of a couple things. Every company I started, we had customers in the beginning. So I felt the weight of doing right by the customer. And I also felt the weight of when we did take investment to, make money for the investors, because I thought that was sort of how you held up your side of the bargain.
That's a really interesting thing to touch on really quickly. You said that you had customers from the very beginning. A lot
Yeah.
of startups these days, they're like, I have the product that's going to be the future. They don't talk to customers. They say, we're going to build out this new technology that no one's doing. How important is it to have customers in the very early days?
Yeah, I think very important. I think a lot of people, and I saw this from the venture side when I was on the venture side, a lot of people can build the technology. You can have an idea and you can get it built. But one of the hardest things to do is actually take it to market and get someone else to pay for it. And I think that's the really, really difficult thing that people don't think about. A lot of founders, and myself included, so I'll put myself into this bucket, fall in love with the thing they're building. They fall in love with the tech they're building. They fall in love with the vision. And I think that's all great. But you have to realize that there's a step where you have to take that thing you've built and actually walk into someone who's never met you before, doesn't buy into what you're saying necessarily at the gate, and get them to actually give you money for it. And that's a difficult process to go through if you haven't been through it.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. And you actually led me right into my next question, talking about your venture days. So you operated an early stage startup prior to being a VC. To me, this is unbelievably important. You need to have that experience. It could be a failure, it could be just an absolute disaster, but you having that experience prior to becoming a VC rather than like a finance background, to me, that's very important. How did having that experience frame your mind when it came to early stage investing?
It totally changed the way I thought about things, primarily because of the fact I knew what the person on the other side of the table had seen. We did Digital Island. I'm trying to remember. I think we did 4 or 5 private rounds, and then we took a public. So I had been through the venture gauntlet up and down Sand Hill Road a bunch of times, trying to figure out how to get VCs to fund you, and got a lot of no's. But you really need one yes sort of thing out of every round. So when I was on the other side of the table from the entrepreneurs who were trying to pitch me, I had to learn how to say no a lot, because as a venture person, you generally maybe do 3, 4 deals a year, and you might get pitched 100. So one, I tried to have empathy for the person that was pitching, because I had been in their shoes and I knew honestly pretty quickly if I was going to say no or try and dig in more. And then the second thing that I thought helped me, because I'd done that early stage startup before, is helping people see the roadmap of where to go, helping them see that vision of kind of what we just talked about. People would come in all very excited about their technology, very excited about their chip or their infrastructure or their software they were building or their mobile app or whatever it was. And all that's really, really fun to talk about. But then you'd say, so tell me about the customers. Tell me about the go-to-market channel. Tell me about the resellers. Tell me about how you think about wholesale market, or whether you're going to think about some sort of a reseller market. How do you think through that? And either you'd see like blood drain from their face because they hadn't thought about it, or they'd have some really good answers, and then you dug in more. So I think the natural curiosity of an entrepreneur lends itself very well to being a curious investor.
And do you think successful VCs don't have to have that entrepreneurial experience and they can solely be from the finance background in certain cases?
I've seen very, very successful VCs on both ways. There's clearly lots and lots of examples of people that came up through the finance world and are very successful VCs. I happen to have an affinity towards folks that do have a bit of an operating background, just because we talk the same language. I don't talk about financial metrics or burn rate to headcount metrics. I talk about what does it actually take to product get out the door, and what does it take to have that product see life and grow in a marketplace. But there are other skill sets that I didn't learn because I didn't come up through the MBA route, and I appreciate that with my folks that I've seen in the venture community also.
a team comprised of both
Yeah,
would probably be the best fit.
yeah, exactly. And I think when you watch some of the dramas around VCs, the WeWork drama or the other ones you see out there, you sort of see these venture capitalists sort of portrayed as, to your point, single-threaded, like financial analyst types. Most VCs I know really try and have a blend of entrepreneurship and financial analyst together.
And so, looking at some of your other ventures or experiences, I should say, you worked at Slack, of course, as SVP of engineering, and you were the CTO of Shopify. I presume that means you worked pretty closely with Tobi Lütke and Stewart Butterfield, at least at
Yes,
one point, and two of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time.
without a doubt, without a doubt, they're both phenomenal.
I'd love to hear about your experience working with both of them. How they're different, everything.
There's a lot to unpack there. Yes, I did work both with Stewart and Toby quite closely. They're both amazing human beings. I think one thing that I would say that they both share is a obsession with the customer and obsession with their product. Even folks that I worked with, like Mark Pincus back at Zynga or Frank Slootman at ServiceNow, these are people that were product people. They lived and breathed the product. We used to say you couldn't move a pixel in the Slack interface without, Stewart knowing about it and wanting to comment and perhaps change it and style it. Toby lives and bleeds entrepreneurs who want to start something and grow it to be, $100 million, $200 million GMV type businesses. That's what he lives for. And I think the one thing that all the entrepreneur CEOs that I've worked for really have is that drive, that just innate craving to know their customer, to want to do better for the customer, and to really want to see the customer excel at whatever they're best at. Stewart and Toby, obviously much different people. They both have, lots of great qualities that I learned a lot from in both those environments. And I think that both of them, like I said, just really have that passion. It doesn't hurt that they're both Canadian. Also, they're also just generally nice people. So that was really, really great to see that similarity between them too.
It's interesting how we've touched on both the VC side and the founder side that there's not one set version or type of person that can be successful. When I first started hearing about startups and VC, everyone who broke into it was saying there's no traditional path. And that just shows because everyone's different experiences and backgrounds all combining into, successful experiences.
That's right. I think, the best folks I've worked with believed in their company, believed in their product, knew it intimately, understood the details, really wanted to be involved in the details of the product and the technology and really guiding it forward. It's really a wonderful place to see where you can see people that are just so passionate about their business. If I look at, Vlad, who's CEO here at Webflow, same character, right? I mean, Vlad is deeply involved with the designers, deeply involved in how we build our product, our no-code platform. He is essentially our chief product leader. He focuses in on making sure that what we're doing for the design community, what we're doing for the people that are building websites, perfectly aligns with his vision. And he spends his days and I assume his nights thinking about that. So
You had, I presume, many opportunities to join unbelievable companies. What attracted you to Webflow?
yeah, I think that the fascinating thing for me in my career, and been very kind, I've been very fortunate along the way. One of the things I look for, and this is going to sound perhaps the opposite of what I should look for, but what I actually look for is markets I don't understand. So let me explain. Um, I knew networking when I was at Cisco, and I went to Digital Island. I hadn't really done this hosting or data center thing before, but I knew I could take what I had learned in infrastructure and apply it to that. As I went into places like Zynga, I didn't know gaming, but I knew I could take infrastructure and build infrastructure for gaming. When I went to ServiceNow, I didn't know enterprise workflow. We didn't call it enterprise workflow at the time. It was cloud-based IT help desk or something like that when I first joined it. But I realized I could take what I had learned along the way and apply it to a different market. So this is a long way to say that I didn't know the design community. I didn't know commerce either when I went to go work for Shopify, but I knew I could take my engineering best practices, my ability to scale, my ability to lead teams, and learn a bunch about commerce and scale that team up. And that's what I was looking for when I came to Webflow. I was looking for something that allowed me to take what I knew how to do best, which is build amazing engineering teams that scale, that deliver on time, and apply it to a market that I was honestly curious about. So I just didn't know the design community and thought it'd be really fun to learn.
What an awesome framework for figuring out where to go next. I mean, you're just building on your own experiences and while also, of course, having a massive impact on an entire engineering team.
Well, I appreciate that. When I left Slack, I didn't want to go to another collaboration tool, right? When I left Shopify, I didn't necessarily want to go into commerce again. Um, I just want to learn something else. The way I describe it to people is like, I want to take what I've known, I want to do like a 10 to 15 degree shift off that tangent and apply it in that direction every single time. I'm not real good at like 180s or 45-degree shifts, but just slight moves, right? It's still a SaaS company, it's still a SaaS app, but it's just enough different that I can learn something new. I can learn about a new technology. I can learn about a new ecosystem or pattern that's in the world, and that's just always been fascinating to me.
I can only imagine. In your time at Webflow, what has been the biggest learning you've taken from their successful team environment compared to, let's say, Shopify?
I think comparisons are hard, but I would say that the one thing that I've learned the most here at Webflow is how passionate design community is. These are people who love Webflow. They love producing websites. They love producing web properties. They love taking the skill of design. I am not an artist, but these people are. And it's really, really fascinating to see how we produce something like a components editing tool, or we produce something like localization, which allows translation into multiple languages, or we produce something like adding a spline integration, which is a 3D modeling integration. And within days, you start to see it all over the web, and you start to see this sort of like in different creative ways and different creative vehicles. It's almost like an amazing mashup of like artistry and web technology sort of merged together. And that's something that's been really enlightening for me.
You've worked with B2B and B2C now that I think about it. Do you have a preference for customers on the B2B or B2C side? Or is there anything else you could say in learning about the different types of customers?
I think the thing that I took from Shopify that I like equally here as Webflow is that continuum that you're talking about. Shopify, we had the continuum of everything from, a person in their kitchen making their thing and then launching it for the first time and seeing the first couple of sales come in and watching it grow into very, very large businesses. And we had the, go to the largest customers on the planet. You can think of like the Supremes or the trying to make sure I don't say a name that they haven't already announced, but very large retail companies that perhaps that are using Shopify. So you get both ends of that spectrum. And I think being able to think about how do you engineer something for a person in their kitchen designing their very first widget to go sell, and engineer for a multi-billion dollar multinational company that is trying to also use the platform is a fascinating problem. And we're seeing that same problem here at Webflow. We have people that are individual designers that love to use the platform. Sometimes they grow up and make little teams and then they sort of start their own agencies, we'd call them. And other times we see teams of people inside of large companies using Webflow as well. So again, it's that spectrum that I find particularly fascinating, and thinking about how to engineer for that is it's really rewarding.
That is, it's amazing. You release a feature and yeah, you get a multi-billion dollar company and a one person designer using that new feature. That's got to be pretty cool to implement.
It is pretty cool, and it's also pretty challenging because you have to make it easy to use and scalable. Because it could be the one person using it that might get, 10 visitors a day, or it could be the person that implements it and gets a million visitors in the next 5 minutes. So you have to think about all that.
Absolutely. You're you're working on the cusp of web development, right? This is a fascinating field. You could even call it an industry. What do you think the future of web development looks like?
Yeah, the future web development, I think, is really headed. Obviously, I sort of votive of my feet. It's headed towards this no-code platform idea. We really want to make it so Webflow is a platform that lets anybody who wants to have their space on the web have the power of a developer. So you don't have to go have a developer. You don't have to use plugins and learn this arcane language that people have been doing in the past to make all this work together like on a WordPress site. But you can do it in a low-code visual way and drive that for anybody on the planet who wants to do that. That's what I think the future is. I think the future, if you think about for websites, though, is it becomes far more personalized. So you won't find websites that are just, generic, perhaps single page websites, but they'll tune themselves, whether you're logging in, Ben, or I'm logging in, or maybe based upon where you're located, or maybe based on your locale that you've set in your browser. But the websites have become more dynamic, faster, and will also become, I think, just a bit more personalized than we're used to seeing right now.
Makes a lot of sense. Is there anything differentiated that you can say the future of Webflow specifically looks like, or is it very similar in that same vein?
Well, we better be building differentiation because that's how you sort of survive in the market. So we're definitely thinking about how do we differentiate our products? How do we incorporate things like AI, which I know a lot of folks are talking about these days? How do we incorporate next generation web delivery frameworks? How do we push things out to the edge so you do end up with some very scalable, highly performant websites? And how do you, again, add those personalization features and those other features I think some of the larger web properties have the benefit of being able to do today? Drive that all the way down again to like the earliest adopters and the individual designer that's sitting in a room by themselves, sort of thing.
100%. And you keep leading me to my next question. It's amazing. I was going to ask about AI in the context of, I guess you'd say, web development. What are your thoughts around it? I can only imagine you guys are thinking about that, all day long, every day.
Oh yeah, the AI topic is one that's hot on everyone's mind these days. So we announced sort of our AI framework and our AI plans a few months back. We've actually released a product already using LLMs. What we essentially did is we had this great set of training courses called Webflow University. And what we ended up doing is we ended up transcribing or take the transcription of Webflow University and training an LLM on it. And then essentially what happens if you're inside of Webflow and you want to know how to do something, you can ask a question in a natural language. And if we have an answer in the video, we'll drop you right to that video spot. So you can just go watch the video on it. We also have lots of plans to think about how to aid. I think the co-pilot analogy is the right analogy. So how to help that human designer, how to help that human actually get things done faster inside of Webflow is definitely part of our plans. And the last thing I'd say is there's a lot of work that I think AI can help or LLMs can help. And I say this with the nicest of intentions, but the drudgery of building a website. Things like adding an image tag to everything, things like making sure your contrast ratios are right for accessibility, things like going through and doing translation. When we released our localization features recently, we had automatic translation in there. So that's using machine learning and a little bit of LLMs in there as well. So there's a lot of things that you do once you've designed the website, once you've made it beautiful, once you know the assets, once you understand the flow. Now you've got to like kind of go through and like button it up. And wouldn't it be nice if you could just button it up a little faster using AI? So we're definitely working on that.
It's so amazing to me as being I'm mostly non-technical, where I could just even now, and it's only going to get better. I can type in a prompt. I can say, I want to build a website. I want it to be focused on selling rocket ships. Design one for me. And there are products out there that are already doing that, which is, again, me being non-technical, that is magic to me. That is,
you can get that design for sure. Now you've got to make it real, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's a very exciting future, and you being on the front lines of that must be fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's a really enviable place to sit. Given our customer base and the amount of folks that are using the platform and the functionality we have on the platform, it's really an enviable place to be. And we just want to make sure we give the power that AI provides to everyone to do web development.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going back to your personal career, you've had such an amazing career. You've continued to ride up unbelievable ranks. What advice would you give to younger developers who are trying to make their way through, let's say the lower rungs of their career into moving forward?
I think the one thing I'd say to that is become an expert in something. I was fortunate enough in my career early on. I became an expert in networking, and at that point, I became sort of the go-to guy for all things networking. And what I found is once I understood that in depth, like down to the packet level, down to the byte level, down to the what happens in the on the wire, on the fiber, what actually happens in networking. Once I understood that at a very, very intricate level, the patterns I saw there applied up and down the stack. So as we're building applications at Digital Island, as we were setting up communication paths inside of Slack, as we were having e-commerce components talk to each other at Shopify, as we're doing some things here at Webflow, once I understood a technology in detail, I could apply those patterns to other technology stacks fairly easily. I think, I'm not the type of human that can absorb things a mile wide and an inch deep. So I wanted to go, an inch wide, a mile deep. And then I found out the subsequent adjacent inches were a whole lot easier. So that's the thing I would say. The other thing I would say that a lot of folks miss early on in their career is becoming what I would call a good engineering citizen in your organization. Write blog posts, help with the interviews, mentor people as you move up from early in your career to later in your career. Spend time asking people that aren't in your team what they're working on and doing PR reviews for them and doing code reviews. Just being able to again, think about you might be an inch deep and an inch wide and a mile deep, but think about how can you extend that inch to 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inches, because as I've said a lot of people over time, your sphere of influence, as you grow that sphere of influence, you become more knowledgeable, you become more important to the organization. And I think that it can help your career grow pretty dramatically.
It's an interesting concept because going deep on one specific thing, in theory, you'd think, okay, I'm going to go to Allan for networking. I'm not going to talk to him about front end web development. I'm going to go to Allan for networking. And so there's the one viewpoint one could take is, okay, Allan's going to go, he's going to be the best networker there is. I'll go to someone else for front end engineering. But there's the other idea of connecting all those different pieces outside of networking, for example, can help you get that overarching viewpoint.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is I like to think about when I'm building or working on an application. I remember early days at Zynga, actually, when we were building gaming, and I just come out of VC. I remember thinking, I want to understand exactly how Farmville works. I want to understand how Zynga Poker works. So I made a mental model of I go to a browser and I bring up the game. Okay, what exactly is happening? How do the sprites get downloaded? What's launching in the browser? What's the connection that's made to the CDN? How does it connect into the backend? What happens on our HA proxies? Just all the way up and down the stack, all the way down to okay, how do those avatars get pulled off disk? Oh, when someone's chatting to another player, how does that connection actually happen in the WebSocket? And then I think when you actually understand all this, and again, my basis, to your point, early on in my career was networking. But based on that, I could sort of extend up the stack and sort of understand what was happening and extend back down the stack. And I think that it's that curiosity of understanding that total end-to-end flow. If you know one piece of the stack, you can start to move up and down it fairly easily.
And I guess if you also specialize in the early days, you're going to be known because you're separating yourself, right? If
That's
with
right.
a specific discipline, you are going to be the networking guy. So people are going to be able to trust you, even if you're not the front end engineer wizard.
That's right. And, I can talk about React these days, and we can talk about Next.js, and we can go talk about all those frameworks that are on the front side. And I think that that's sort of super important as well. But when I think about those, I think about React and how that actually works, and then talking to a socket, and then talking down to TCP or UDP, and then going down to IP, and then how do those packets get routed, and then comes back into the VM, and how does React render, and what happens actually in the browser. So I think through that entire cycle. And I think it's so important that, again, maybe I was fortunate because everything eventually hits the network these days. But I think starting with something and then expanding your knowledge based upon a very, very well defined understanding of that something is super important. You could start with React and then go down the stack if you wanted. But I just happen to start at the bottom of the stack.
That's awesome. No, I love that. It's another great framework for people to take away. My closing question for every guest is: you can either choose your favorite quote, your most polarizing belief, or both.
I think my favorite quote has got to be it's an FDR quote. It says, "A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor," and that's one way to say it. Unless the only way you're really going to get good at something is to go through some waves. And I think being able to go up and down, live with those waves. I've had very high highs and I've had pretty low lows. But if I hadn't sailed those stormy seas, I don't think I'd be a very good sailor. So I just think it's a great, great quote. I think about it a lot. I think about it in times of adversity, like, okay, I'm in the trough of the wave now. This is teaching me how to be a good sailor. And I also think about it on the very high highs. And I think, okay, I'm riding high on the wave right now. Took a lot to get here. So I think that idea of like smooth seas never made great sailors is something I think about a lot.
What an awesome quote, and great to be aware of where you are on that trough too.
Yeah, we're all very fortunate these days, and I think that understanding that is something that's one allows me to be gracious and have a lot of gratitude for where I've landed up, but I also recognize I spent a lot of working hours and a lot of sailing rough seas to get here. So
100%. Allan, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. Great conversation and had a great time.
thank you. I do too. Thanks for the conversation. I appreciate it.
Of course. Best of luck to you in Webflow.
Thank you.